Normally I'll reuse old candle jars, but I go through quite a few pots of honey and I wanted to try and find a way to reuse them, so I'm going to be using one of those jars today. I'm going to be using an ammonite cast, some polyfiller, and I've got two different sizes, but because the jar is quite small, I'm going to be using the smaller mould, and then I'm going to be using some red clay. Now I'm just going to take small little blobs of this and start pressing it into the mould, and you want to press this really firmly just to make sure that you get all the detail which is in the mould. Once this is done, I'm going to peel it out and then I'm going to stick it to the side of the jar, and this isn't with any kind of glue. For the moment I'm just trying to get the shape of it. Now if the clay is wet enough, it should stick to the jar quite well. So you're going to peel that out of the mould and then you're going to carefully press that onto the side of the jar. Now the easiest way to get this to stick on without pressing with your fingers and then destroying the shape is to get something like a sculpting tool and then go over the little detail and press slightly. That way if there's any areas which maybe didn't pick up all the detail that the mould had, you can just fix that up, but you can also get the clay to press to the jar a little bit better. Now I'm going to repeat the whole thing again, and I'm going to be doing 4 of these and sticking them to the side of the jar. Now if the clay's a little dry, it's not going to stick very well, so then you can just put a little bit of water on the back and then stick it to the jar and it should get the shape. You want to wait for it to dry enough till it's held that shape, then you're going to take that off the jar, wait for it to dry completely, and then we're going to start using the polyfiller. I've used some super glue to stick down the ammonite onto the jar, and then bit by bit we're going to start adding the polyfiller. Now I'm going to do this in chunks. I've got a little bit of blue tack stuck onto the table, so while one half is drying with the polyfiller, that way it's raised, I'm just going to stick the jar on top of that, but once it's dry I'm going to remove it and then cover up the other side. And I'm going to do quite a few layers of this, and then once it's dry I'm just going to peel off anything from the bottom. And then I'm also going to start scraping away any of the the polyfiller which is sticking out a little bit, especially on the top and the bottom. So that way it's smooth and it's not going to catch on anything that you put it on, like a shelf for example, and then leave little white bits all over the place. You really don't want that. After that I'm going to take some water, some brown ink, and the first thing I'm going to do is put some water right down the spiral on the ammonite shell. And we're going to put that right there, so that way once we put the ink afterwards, all that ink is going to settle into any of the hollows. So I'm going to do this around the ammonite and then also down the centre, and then I'm going to draw out lines over the shells, and I'm going to do this on all of them and then start drawing out the shape of the actual Ammonite creature. So we've got the shape of the shell already, and then I'm going to start drawing the creature. Now obviously if this was a fossil, this wouldn't be drawn like this. It would be more like an indentation in the rock. Now that's another variation that you can do, but I'll do a tutorial for that another day. For the moment I'm just going to paint it on and then add more detail onto the shells. Once I've finished painting with the ink, I'm going to go over with some pens, and I'm going to be using a lighter beige and then a dark brown just to re-outline everything and then draw the shape of the ammonite. I'm going to add the eyes, all the little tentacles as well. Now after that we're going to be moving on to a gold ink. Now I've just got a regular gold ink, but you can also use acrylic paint if that's what you have to hand, anything that's shiny basically. And we're going to be applying this where the highlights are. So highlights on the shell and also the ammonite, especially the face, and then thinly all over the little tentacles as well. If you're not too keen on using paint, because some people do have preferences, some people prefer to use paint and some people prefer to use pencils, you could draw this. Now if you don't want to draw the ammonite onto the clay, then what you need to do is to make sure that where that is going to be drawn, you need to make sure that the polyfiller is very smooth, and then you can get away with drawing it with a pencil. Now for the eye I'm going to be adding a black rhinestone because I had to add a rhinestone somewhere, and I'm going to be using nail varnish to stick it down. You could also use super glue. Then I'm going to spray paint a clear gloss all over it to hold everything into place and to make sure that the paint doesn't wear away. And that's it. You're done.